With a series as big as Grand Theft Auto, I think it's a pretty safe assumption to say that everyone watching this video has had some sort of experience with this franchise. Whether that was exploring the crowded streets of Liberty City, causing havoc in San Andreas, or enjoying the sunshine of Vice City, this is a game series that has left an impact on millions of different people from around the world. This series hit its stride with Grand Theft Auto 3 and has since been one of the golden standards within the open world genre. I got a fun fact for you guys today. Did you know there were actually other Grand Theft Autos before Grand Theft Auto 3? That might seem pretty obvious for anyone that has the ability to count, but with the lack of conversation around the original two GTAs, it might be something that a lot of people might not really think about. And you know, there are quite a few reasons for that. These are games that are not widely accessible considering they're unavailable on pretty much all major storefronts. They're also a completely different genre from what we know the game series as today. And, if we're being honest, a large part of the GTA community were too young to experience these games at the time of their release, and even when these games came out, they didn't exactly light the world on fire. Grand Theft Auto, for as much of a mainstay as it is now, really started off as a relatively niche franchise back in 1997. The game initially was released for both MS-DOS and Windows before receiving a stripped-down port to the original PlayStation, which was followed by an even more stripped-down port to the Game Boy Color. GTA 1 was ultimately a commercial success, but really failed to capture much critical praise. On a more personal note, before playing the game for this review, Grand Theft Auto 1 was actually something that I sampled before. I got into a bit of an emulation craze a few years back, and GTA 1 was one of the few games I decided to play for about 30 minutes before I put it down and never touched it again. There were a lot of little things that piled up that I'll explain over the course of this video, but the main thing that I could just not get past was the fact that it had a top-down perspective compared to the third-person games I was used to with the series by that point. I know, kind of a lame reason considering there is nothing inherently wrong with that choice of perspective, but that was what ultimately stopped me from trying to play the game. So here we are, a few years later at the beginning of this GTA marathon, starting with a game that I dropped a long time ago. Well, has my opinion on this game changed at all? Let's see. We have a lot to discuss today, so without further ado, this is my review for Grand Theft Auto.
Good shot, kid. I think you got him. Good shot, kid. I think you got him.
If there was one thing that I could point to about this game that may be its actual biggest selling point, it's that it still has the GTA feel that anyone who has any experience with the franchise is all too familiar with by now. For the maybe 5 or 6 people who don't understand what that feeling is, let me try to explain. There is this almost zen-like tranquility that often overcomes a player when they're playing a Grand Theft Auto game. This is often when the game is at its most immersive. Typically when you're driving through the city, listening to one of the game's many radio stations, or you're walking down the sidewalks and hearing the ambient noises the environment has around you. That feeling then gets interrupted with a sudden rush of adrenaline, often coming from the consequence of the player's actions. Maybe they accidentally hit a pedestrian with their car, or they got into a head-on collision, or they fired a shot that either scared or harmed someone. This is where things start to escalate as the police arrive on the scene, and the player has a choice of either going quietly or starting an all-out speed chase. Let's be honest though, no one really takes the first option, and just like that, now you have the cops tailing you, making whatever your current objective was all that much harder. This is often where you'll throw all caution to the wind, become much more reckless, and take bigger risks. If there's a thin passageway through some back alleys, you'll take them. If it means driving into oncoming traffic to throw off the police, that's no big deal. And if there are more bystanders that are getting in your way while you're on the run, they might as well just be bonus points for you. So what are some of these common GTA tropes that really got their foundation here? Well, one thing that sits in the back of my mind when I think of a particular GTA game is the audio, especially when it comes to the soundtrack. These things go a long way into the overall vibe of the game, and the music in GTA 1, while limited in terms of volume, has a number of different genres to listen to. Everything from alternative rock, hip-hop, several different EDM genres, glam rock, and even some country. Granted, none of the tracks in this game are going to be things that you've heard of before, being all original compositions. They're definitely played for laughs for the most part, but they're catchy enough to still be entertaining. You can even play your own music if you take out the disc for GTA and replace it with a CD of your choice to play your own songs. Assuming that it's 1997 and you're playing this game with the CD-ROM, of course. The audio in general is quite immersive. You've got a number of things that you'd probably expect, like pedestrians shouting off random obscenities, to the vehicles giving a rattling noise when they take significant damage, to having the audio be muffled when you go under a bridge. Hell, they even put a burp and a fart button. Do with that what you will. There's also some voice cutscenes at the end of every level.
Ask him again, I'll stick a gun up your ass and blow your f***ing eyeballs out. Capiche?
I said they were voiced, not good. They do kind of add to the game's overall charm though. The other thing that I think of when I think of GTA is the absolute mayhem you can cause. And rest assured, that is definitely here too. Any car you see on the street can be yours with the simple press of a button for you to commandeer and go on your own crime spree. In Grand Theft Auto, you take control of the world's worst driver on your quest to spread crime throughout the city by whatever means necessary. These can be through crime-related syndicate missions that are given to you, or your own goals to cause as much destruction as possible. You are given a small selection of weapons and a large number of vehicles to play with, and the thrill of taking down dozens of people or getting into a high-speed chase is a very solid foundation in this game. Of course, after a while, the cops will come after you as you get a wanted level based on the volume and severity of your crimes. You may be able to go unnoticed for some minor crashes, but run someone over or fire off a gun and the police are bound to come your way. The cops will try their best to arrest you, being instantaneous on the point of contact, but they also really aren't above killing you either, even on some of the lower wanted levels. God, these guys are as short-tempered and violent as actual police officers. Huh. They'll try to box you in with other cop cars, they'll set up roadblocks to prevent you from passing. They're pretty damn resilient too, since the only way to get them off of your trail is by painting your car or finding the appropriate power-up. Running from the cops in GTA is an inevitability, and if not because of your own actions, but because the game wills it based off of an objective in the game's many missions. For people skeptical on how GTA 1 stacks up to the rest of the series, you may be glad to hear of how well this game nails the same GTA formula that has been present throughout the entire franchise. This was easily the most enjoyment I had during my playtime with GTA 1, which is even more impressive when you take into account that yes, this game is the first entry in the series, yes, it is a multi-directional shooter rather than a third-person game, and most importantly, yes, it is old as shit. So while I think the first entry in the GTA series does a good job of laying the groundwork, there are a number of smaller trappings that do make this game increasingly more difficult to play as the years go on. I touched on earlier about the availability of GTA 1 and that it has been delisted from most major storefronts. If you were one of the lucky or resourceful ones to have an official version from Steam or a download from Rockstar's website from back in the day, it's probably no shock to you that this game doesn't run particularly well on modern hardware. The game can essentially only be played full screen with weird graphical bugs and in a much smaller resolution than I can say I'd really prefer. Even worse, the frame rate can be very inconsistent, and choosing to unlock the frame rate makes the game essentially unplayable. Thankfully, there have been plenty of workarounds from fans, such as the GTA 1 Max Pack, that essentially emulate the game as if it was the DOS version, with the bonus of a better launcher and the 2 London expansions packaged along with it. This is the version I recommend and the version I primarily played for this video. I wouldn't say that this version fixed all of GTA 1's issues though, as I still found the occasional bugs, such as one mission failing after I completed the required objective, and another tailing mission that went over 20 minutes long before I officially gave up and blew up the car I was supposed to be following. These didn't happen too often, but the 2 occasions that it did were pretty annoying. Something that happened a bit more frequently was the game's brain-dead AI causing me trouble. To give a few examples, in one of the trailing missions I did, the car I was following eventually had its path cross with the vehicle that I abandoned earlier on in my play session. Instead of, you know, driving around it, the car sat there in congested traffic for a ludicrous amount of time. This meant that I needed to get out of my vehicle to move that car, or slam into it in order to have the mission progress. Now the other example I'm going to give did almost the exact opposite. There was a mission where I had to kill a certain number of enemies in an area. Problem was, when I killed one, all the others would scatter and run away. And they didn't just run away into some confined space, unless you count the entire level as a confined space. This caused me to chase them down all the way to the other side of the stage. Now, if it was scripted to maybe have one enemy get away that I had to chase after, that'd be fine. But it was several running away in different directions that just meant it was a waste of my time in order to kill them all. Unfortunately, the stability of this game is only the tip of the iceberg, as the next thing I really want to talk about has to do with the writing, for what little writing there actually is. So GTA 1 doesn't really have a story, it just has a bunch of mini quest chains that you do inside of the levels. And look, I know Grand Theft Auto is a series about shocking people and being controversial, It's a series where you can kill police officers, murder hookers, torture people in GTA 5's case, and we all know about the hot coffee mod for GTA San Andreas. None of that shit bothers me, and neither does the stuff in this game, because at the end of the day, they were just some bad jokes made in the 90s with the intention of being edgy. I do, however, have to mention that there are a lot of jokes that play on racial stereotypes, that are sexist, that do use ableist terms, or use homophobic language, and there's also a ton of unnecessary swearing, like it's an ItsGheb video or some shit. Look, I grew up watching South Park and went to a public school. There wasn't anything in this game said to me that I haven't heard of before, but if those are things that you don't like, just know that they pop up frequently in this game. I also know for some people that's part of the appeal, so hey, to each their own. Personally, I don't find anything in this game to be very funny since it seems really dated. Like, some of the dialogue gave me a chuckle for how absurd it was, because it just reads like a transcription from an old Xbox Live lobby.
Learn how to actually play the fucking game and talk.
Shoot a gun, dog. Learn how to fucking shoot a gun. You
fucking riot shield. What else do you want me to
Oh, riot shield. I'm a pussy that use riot shield.
But man, there's no way in hell they're going to put half the stuff said in this game into something like GTA 6. It's pretty damn wild. While that sort of humor was the status quo at the time, the graphics on the other hand were incredibly subpar even upon release. I'm gonna come out and say it, I think this game for the most part looks pretty ugly. I know that this game is from 1997, but I still think it looks pretty rough even when compared with other games out at the time. By the time GTA 1 released, we already had Final Fantasy VII, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Tomb Raider, and Crash Bandicoot. Hell, if you want to look at things that have a somewhat closer perspective to GTA, we could also look at Fallout, Diablo, and Command & Conquer Red Alert. These games all looked much better than what GTA 1 did, and they were all released before it. There are some things such as the 3D effects on buildings and the detail of the car you're driving taking damage depending on where it was hit, which are a nice touch. Everything else, though, is pretty bad. The color palette is decently varied, especially when you get into Vice City, but places like Liberty City suffer from every location looking so similar, making it hard to remember where you are. The worst has to be the character models, though. You pick from these selection of ugly bastards on the character select screen, but at the end of the day, this is what your character looks like in-game. Pretty lame. I wonder what people in this game will look like with some more detail. Oh, Jesus! Never mind, forget I said anything. One of the last smaller things I'll touch on in GTA before we get into the thick of my complaints is the game's live system. Yep, that's right. The game that wants you to have fun by causing as much destruction as possible and throw yourself into many dangerous situations as it can, has a live system. 3 lives with the chance to gain more. Lose one and you lose all your weapons, lose all of them and that's the end of the stage for you, which means you have to start over. When you factor in it only takes 1 bullet to kill you and that each of these chapters can take around an hour and a half to 2 hours to finish, yeah, you can see why this might be a problem. Now these things I just mentioned are all mostly minor annoyances that I chalked up to being a product of the time. The next few topics I want to go over also relate to this game's age in a way, but they are much more broad topics that I think we need to delve into a little further. One of the most forward-thinking aspects of GTA 1 has to be its objective design. Anyone who has played any of the modern-day GTA titles or adjacent Rockstar games, such as Red Dead Redemption or Bully, is probably familiar with this mission-based formula. There are typically a handful of missions around the map at any given time that you can complete in whichever order you want, where upon completion of a certain amount will open up further events in the story. Now believe it or not, GTA 1 actually gives you a little bit more flexibility than what we are used to today. Essentially how it works is that each chapter has a point threshold, which needs to be met in order to unlock the finality to complete the level. How you go about getting these points is entirely up to you. Sort of. See, you get points by doing common activities such as running into cars or killing people, and there's also a few options that you can go out of your way to do, like selling cars at the docks or doing some Killing Frenzy side missions. But you won't earn a ton of points doing that. Instead, you are heavily encouraged to do some of the game's many missions, with the prospect of higher point payouts and the point multipliers. The higher point payouts are pretty self-explanatory, often being tens of thousands of more points than what you would get for doing any of the previously mentioned tasks. The multipliers are the big thing though. These will add an additional multiplier onto your score bonus for the rest of the stage. They're basically a requirement, which thankfully you either get rewarded with them after finding them in the open world or completing missions. If you get arrested, you will lose around half of your score multiplier, which fucking sucks because it makes everything take way longer, which means you need to play more of the game. Alright, let's get into it. I don't like a lot of the missions in this game. If I can say one positive thing before giving my gripes, it's that there's actually a somewhat surprising amount of variety in these missions. You have missions where you have to transport cars from one area to another, some where you need to hijack certain vehicles, some where you need to taxi an NPC to different locations, assassination missions, one where you have to destroy a certain number of vehicles, some that you have to follow people, some that require you to get to a location in a certain time frame, some that will have you go meet with NPCs while you accomplish one goal, and even a couple more out there missions like the one that has you keep a bus going above 50 miles per hour before it blows up. It fucking sucks. So the missions themselves really aren't too bad usually. They often have some goals related to the crime syndicate you're working for, and can range from being as simple as helping a guy get laid to assassinating the president of the United States. Well shit, those are some pretty high stakes. It's too bad that that mission devolves into a game of chance by spraying bullets and hoping you kill them before they kill you. More on the gunplay missions later, but just know that this game has a selection of them and they all suck. One of the other mission types I hate are the timed missions. So some of them really aren't too bad, but others have a very strict, and I mean very fucking strict time limit. Asking the player to go somewhere to kill someone, drop something off, or answer a payphone before it explodes. God, I heard about blowing someone's phone up, but this is ridiculous.
Hey, that really sucked!
Running out of times on these missions will lead to failure, as well as with certain missions failing to follow the instructions, getting arrested, or dying. So what is the consequence for failing a mission? Well, if you were at the beginning of a quest chain, that chain is no longer available, meaning you have to forfeit all potential points as well as the point multiplier that came with it. You do not get another chance to complete this mission, so if you fuck up and that was a mission that you wanted to finish, you have to restart the entire level again. So thankfully, GTA gives players more than enough missions to actually complete. However, if you fuck up too many times, you're going to need to grind out selling cars to hopefully get enough points to progress. This didn't happen to me in my playthrough, mainly because I use save states. But just know that it's absolutely possible when you're playing through Grand Theft Auto. We often cite GTA 3 as one of the first modern examples of an open world video game, but technically both GTA 1 and GTA 2 still feature their own takes on the open world formula as well. In GTA 1's case, we actually have the three most iconic locations from all of Grand Theft Auto being Liberty City, San Andreas, and Vice City. Each of these cities has 2 chapters each with the same map, but a different selection of missions for each. The 3 cities mainly operate the same. Each has multiple streets to drive on, sidewalks across, and a good amount of secrets to discover. These include extra weapons, power-ups for point multipliers, extra lives, bulletproof vests, even whole-ass tanks. Each level has a train system for slightly faster travel, just don't step on the wrong part of the tracks. Some of the areas around the maps are even given the whole secret walkway pass, which often lead to rewards, which is nice to see. The primary difference between these cities is mainly the mission selection, the layout, and the aesthetics. San Andreas and Vice City I think are pretty close to one another, in terms of similarity, not geographically. Moving on. They both have a pretty straightforward layout, with Vice City probably being the easier of the two, and a pretty varied color palette that helps make the different areas on the map stand out a little bit more. Though they do reuse a lot of textures to the point that it can sometimes be hard to remember where you are and where you need to go. And if you take that problem and crank them up to a higher degree, then we have Liberty City. I really don't like Liberty City that much. It's the most complex map out of the 3, with some of the weirdest missions, and it honestly feels like something that should have been the final level rather than the first one. If you aren't by the Central Park area, you are going to have no idea where you're at, considering everything looks exactly the same. Everything in Liberty City, minus the grass in Central Park and the water, is gray, and it's so boring to look at. This is also the only city to feature the vehicle missions, objectives that only show up after you enter a certain car. What car is that, you might be wondering? Well, the pager at the top will tell you what type of car and will give you a ballpark location. Make sure you're paying attention to when that goes off. It will not repeat this again for you. And if finding these hidden cars wasn't bad enough, just trying to navigate the city is a massive pain in the ass. There are so many points that just lead to water, or a dead end, or a bridge you can't cross without finding the right way on it. It's so annoying just to find out how to get from one island to another. Though the game really doesn't do you any favors in helping make this any easier. You might have a better chance of actually navigating real-life New York than you would in this game. First off, there's no map. Nope, not even in the instruction manual. Trust me, I found a PDF and it's not in there either. Look up a guide for this and save yourself some time. Trust me, I don't know how this mission was even a thing. Secondly, do you see that arrow in the front of your car? It is there to lead you to your objective. which doesn't sound too bad except for one problem. It's not context sensitive, meaning that it's always going to point directly towards your objective goal and won't take into account obstacles such as buildings or water that might prevent you from being able to drive in a straight line to your destination. This makes this arrow essentially useless in most scenarios. Actually, it's worse than that, because sometimes your arrow will point you down ways that will lead you to a dead end that will only waste your time and actively make things harder. The only help you get is the neighborhood names that pop up on the top of your screen, and you know, I could get behind a game relying on you being able to recognize certain buildings and street names to find your destination, but GTA 1 doesn't have enough recognizable locations in order to make that actually work. Instead, we have to rely on ineffective or outside sources of navigation for something that should have been built straight in. GTA 1's open world had a lot of promise, and honestly, if those navigation problems were properly addressed, I think these would actually be pretty good for the time. As it is, they just come off as clumsy, convoluted, and just not very fun to play. As I said earlier, the primary issue I initially had with Grand Theft Auto was its use of the top-down perspective. Now that's not to say I don't think GTA should work this way. There are a couple of other games that follow that same design decision, but what I'm saying is that at least with the way that GTA 1 handles things, this perspective simply does not work. Let's start with the way that this game controls. When I first played, I was sort of expecting it to play more like a twin-stick shooter, which wouldn't have been that bad actually. Being that it was designed to originally be played on a keyboard as well as the original Sony PlayStation controller, you know, the one without analog sticks, I was wrong with my assumption. You were playing this game with one of the hallmark control schemes from the PlayStation, tank controls. Now when you're in a vehicle like a car, a motorcycle, or shit, an actual tank, this is fine. It makes sense that you shouldn't be able to change directions immediately, so the tank controls work here. Actually, the driving in this game is pretty solid for the most part. Each car has its own speed and handling capabilities, and when you get into the flow of how your car handles, you can actually pull off some pretty impressive shit. I won't say every car is a winner, and choosing to drive a motorcycle is almost a surefire way of falling off 20 times on the way to your destination, but for the most part, this is good. Emphasis on the most part though, I do have a few issues. Firstly, the collision detection in the vehicles could definitely be a little bit better. Just assume that everyone's vehicle is about 1 to 3 pixels larger than they actually are, because trying to skate by another vehicle almost always leads to a crash when it really feels like it shouldn't. Secondly, and this is probably my biggest issue with the driving in this game, is the camera. What the fuck were they thinking with this one? So the camera will dynamically zoom out as you gain speed in order to give the player more time to react. Which, you know, is kinda cool I guess, except for one problem. Rapidly changing speed sends the camera into an absolute frenzy, which is incredibly disorienting. I kid you not, I actually started to get headaches after playing this game for more than a few hours, and eventually my eyes were able to adjust to what was happening on the screen and the headaches stopped, but holy shit, I should not be put through physical pain while playing a video game. I would have much rather preferred if the camera was pulled back to its max distance whenever you entered a vehicle. This is something I'd honestly expect to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. My only other issue is with how this game's top-down perspective limits important information to the player. There will be times that you'll be in a high-speed chase and try to cut a corner only to accidentally hit a sign that you didn't see there because it was too thin to make out at the angle that you were currently at. And I mean that these objects can be so thin that they aren't even visible to the player. And sometimes there will be objects in the foreground that might obstruct your view like a bridge over a road. When these come up, there's an arrow that shows up underneath your car, which is nice, but it doesn't help you if there's other vehicles in the way, and since you can't see, you might not know the best way to progress. Not to mention, there are some obstacles the player has to go under that aren't always clear, such as the driveway underneath a building, or even worse, certain walkways that can only be accessed while you're on foot. Speaking of that, these tank controls just simply do not work when you're walking around outside of a vehicle. Anyone who's played Tomb Raider or a classic Resident Evil game probably knows what I'm talking about, but in those games, I think they're alright. They are far less successful in Grand Theft Auto though. Initially, the tank controls feel clumsy and are a bit jarring, but something that might be overall doable. You think to yourself, as long as you can minimize your time on foot and just drive as much as possible, it might not be too bad. And you know for a while, you do that and it's okay. The problems start to arise when you are required to participate in gunfights. Good God, these fucking suck. Not only because of how the control scheme works, but how you also have to deal with this game's shitty hit detection. You will see bullets pass right through enemies if you are not pixel perfect for where their hitbox is, and it is very frustrating. Couple that with the fact that all it takes is one bullet to put you down, and combat becomes less of a thing of skill and more of a game of putting as many bullets down range in the hopes that they kill enemies before they kill you. Fighting one enemy at range is already challenging, but sometimes you'll be fighting close to 10 people with guns, which good fucking luck. It's possible, but there's a large element of chance in the whole thing. Couple all that with the frustrations I mentioned earlier about the live system, and you have a recipe for frequent restarts and even more frequent frustrations. I went pretty hard on this game, but I want to stress, I really did not hate this. GTA 1 is not a great game, but you know, there is some merit to playing it. Being able to see where a legendary franchise got its start, and especially to see that they nailed the key formula on the first try, is honestly pretty impressive. It's just everything else that brings this game down. There are so many small trappings and signs of age that make this game feel like a product of its time in the absolute worst ways. I'm sure this is a game that has its fans, and if you enjoy GTA 1, more power to you. I kinda put this game in the similar spot that I put Minecraft Story Mode. Game is alright, has some pretty big flaws, but in some areas, it does some stuff pretty damn well. If you're curious, give it a shot. It might just be worth it to see how GTA got its start. If that doesn't interest you though, skip this one. For as many good games as the GTA series has, I would not recommend this one for your first, second, third, fourth, or even fifth Grand Theft Auto experience. That's all the time I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. What was your favorite memory of Grand Theft Auto? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving it a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again. I'll catch you in the next video.